when we struggle in general, what are we struggling with? When we find ourselves in a space where there are things that we can't achieve, sometimes we're like, we've done everything we can to try to get to that space. Why is it that I am still struggling? One of the things that I've discovered that stands between me and my goals is two things. There's education and accountability, which are two really, really important points. And a lot of great and successful programs that go on have usually an accountability measure to the experience where you need to show up for yourself and show up for others, and that responsibility of being completely present, which in turn really helps with the success of achieving that goal. So that's the accountability is a key component, but the education is also one of those things that are detrimental to being able to get from one space to another. When we think about our fears, when we think about just fear in general, think about what does fear have on you that like lets you kind of be in this space where we end up feeling paralyzed or stuck. Just think about those kind of like elements of in your life when you are feeling like you can't get from point A to point B. What is it? So I always talk about this thing of like siyata dishmaya. There's the timing, there's the divine intervention, and that is definitely a huge component. But there's also the preparation. And that preparation, especially when we think about like Judaism, that preparation a lot of time has to do with education. And the education in itself is the gap, is like it fills the gap between our fears and the unknown and the known, right? Because fear is usually unknown. It's like there's something unknown to us. And then it's like we're going in blind. And when we're going in blind, we're not aware of the dimensions, right? So if you're not aware of the dimensions, then there's that fear component. So or the insecurity. So when we're trying to achieve those goals of trying to step into the things we want to do, or step into the best self and allow that confidence to escort us into our experience, a key component is education and preparation. So we talk about preparation a lot, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the educational component. So there's the fear of getting the thing done, but then there's also the fear of the thing I don't know, right? And for a lot of us, if we've been in a space where we've done certain things for so many years, like it's years and years of this repetition, to stop and try something new can be really scary. To question our belief systems can be extremely scary because we've invested so much in that thought, the idea, the concept in total, that to walk away from it, we feel like either we've betrayed ourselves or maybe we're losing our mind, right? But in truth, this piece of learning how to learn is the element in life that gets us from the space of being stuck to being able to feel that freedom. Something great that I heard, again, I think I've shared this before, but I worked with this musician once, and we were talking about assets and access, and he said to me, he said, it used to be that people wanted to accumulate assets. And assets is this thing of accumulating stuff, like a lot of stuff. And he said, but nowadays, we're focusing more on access. And when we talk about access, we're talking about the ability to move from one place to the other. The thing is, when you have a lot of assets, a lot of investments, it's really difficult to navigate because everywhere you go, you have all these things to worry about, which the more you invest in, right? So like the more stuff you have, the harder it is to actually move. Simple factor from a space of a body in ourselves, right? So from a body space, the heavier we are, and again, we're talking healthy dynamics here. But if we're heavier, it's going to make it more difficult to move. In our house, if we have more clutter, it's going to make it difficult to be able to think about even moving to a new house. If we're in a space where we are trying to accumulate a title, or even if somebody's like, you have somebody that's in an Olympic sport, there's so much invested in that specific thing that to walk away from that thing can be so scary. It can be scary. It's also, there's a lot of unknown. And also we've invested so much of our assets, of who we are, right, into that thing. And what that does is it creates this sense of feeling paralyzed or insecure in the spaces that we don't know. When we think about the things we don't know, a lot of times we don't want to enter that space. So if you think of, there's two doors, and there's the door the familiar, and then there's the unfamiliar. If I tell you there's two beasts behind those two doors, right? We will usually go for the beast we know rather than the beast we don't know. And it's so important to know that in life, even if things are hard, we will usually lean into the things we know rather than what we don't know. But here's the thing. If you're constantly focusing on the things you know, we end up in a space where we aren't open. We aren't open to learning new things. We're not open to new experiences, and it really stunts the growth, and it makes it difficult to step into our fullest potential. So there's a couple things that are stacked on that. There's ego, right? There's the ego, there's the fear of failure, there is all that kind of stuff. But when we talk about interior design and we think about, let's say, even this time of year, right? So it's Rosh Hashanah, we're resetting. For a lot of us, I can say this for myself, when we're thinking about Rosh Hashanah, what we're doing is we're realigning. We're coming back to ourselves. There's this return, right? There's this tshuva, which is returning to ourselves, returning to the essence of who we are. So throughout the year, we go out there, we play, we do our best to become a better self. And then what happens is Rosh Hashanah comes, and it's that point in time where we have to look at all that stuff and say, okay, what worked for me? What didn't work for me? And then what is my true investment? The beauty of Rosh Hashanah is because it's a new year. And if we think of a new year for the soul and the spirit, for the spiritual experience, we're using that as the compass. What in our life is adding or is supporting our spiritual practice, and what is not? So different times of year, we look at different pieces, but Rosh Hashanah is that newness where we're returning to that spiritual practice. And what happens is I can say for myself, I look at some of the stuff that I've done this year, and one thing I've said is I love the person I'm becoming, right? So I love that person. There were hardships, definitely. We all have our struggles, but then we also have our patterns. And when I think of some stuff, I could say, okay, these kind of things might have been a waste of time. Maybe in these areas I didn't make the right decisions. But knowing that because I have that component of movement and play where I'm not stuck, it makes it so much easier for me to adjust as I go instead of getting stuck in the concept of, if this didn't work for me, now I'm committed to failure, for example, or the idea of failure. Alex Mosey he says something really great as well. He said, sometimes when we have a decision to make, it's like saying no to somebody, or just communicating something that makes it feel extremely uncomfortable in our body. And this could be us saying no to ourselves as well. We have difficulty stepping into that space. So for some people, it'll take them an hour. For some people, it'll take them a few days. Some people, it could take them months, and some people, it could take years to communicate something, either to yourself or to others. And this is so important to know, that when you're in a space where you are struggling with communication, right? That takes up real estate. That stuff takes up so much time. If you think about how many days you've thought about moving into that new space. For example, for me, I always talk about weight's an easy one, where in a space where I'm like, I should be skinnier. I shouldn't be this fat, for example, right? If I think about since I was 12, that conversation that people that I meet are like, that's the first thing they say. They're like, oh, did you lose weight? And I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, say hello, say something else, But when you come from an environment where your size is such a big deal, right? And then I had to ask myself, I was like, no, I'm okay in my space. As in, to me, the goal is to be healthy. But that insecurity of thinking about weight all the time, if I go back to the years and years, it's like almost 30 years of investment in, am I the right size, right? And if we think about this from, not from even a weight perspective, but anything, am I in the right circle of friends? Am I in the right home, right? Am I in the right body even? What we do is we're wasting energy and space. And it also creates difficulty to actually achieve the goals. So what we want to do is, it's really, really important for us to take this time to know that if we want to get from point A to point B, we have to make sure that we aren't finding ways to get stuck, and educate ourselves on the components that are making us kind of repeat the patterns. So when we think about education, for a lot of us, we feel very overwhelmed. We went to school, we hated school, school was annoying. We think that most of what we had to learn was a waste of time. And when we think about having to learn something new, we resist. There's a natural resistance to learning something new. Whenever my kids come to me and say that, what's the point of school? Why do I have to go to school? I'm not doing good anyway. I always say to them, school's not only about learning the knowledge of education in the sense of textbook knowledge. There's a social component, there's an emotional component. You start learning so much about yourself in an environment, also in an environment that you might not be comfortable in. So even if one of my kids come to me and say that they hate their teacher, they're having difficulty with a certain personality, I will say to them, instead of, obviously there's compassion for that, but I will also say to them that it's an opportunity to them to learn more about themselves than to learn about anything else or anyone else in that space. When we take that approach, and we're able to either read or tell ourselves when we're in a difficult situation that this is a space where we get to learn the most about ourselves, what ends up happening is number one, it becomes about us. It doesn't become about everybody else. Because a lot of times when we're worried about how we fit into the world, we keep adjusting ourselves according to what the world needs. But if we are focusing more on our learning and our growth, when we run into something challenging, it becomes about us, where we're able to really begin to discover where it is that we can grow in this situation. So knowing that taking that time to educate ourselves, that means there are books. Whenever I talk about like even therapy or coaching, people shy away. They, especially if there's a stereotype of I don't like, that's for people that aren't normal. Like, people think that if we go for help, if we ask for help, it's a problem. But it's really important. If we think about the conversation, there's I think it's Pirkei Avos that says Aseh lecha rav, right? Aseh lecha rav v'knei lecha chaver. Aseh lecha rav is, there are many levels. You have a mentor and you have somebody that can guide you, but on a day-to-day basis, that is in the education of really learning about yourself. The more you know about yourself, the more you know about your challenges, the more we are okay with it. As we get older and as we evolve, what's going to happen is that we are okay with adjustments. We are okay with things not working exactly the way we think they're going to work, because it's not our world. It's not our world. It's Hashem created this world, this beautiful, beautiful world, and we're here for those experiences. But if we're stuck in our ways, those experiences become difficult to enjoy or learn from or engage in. Another thing that I see a lot is when people, as they get older, they're learning from experience rather than taking the time to educate themselves. So what happens is if somebody decides that at a certain age they've learned everything they need to learn, you see that they learn from experience, but they don't mature. So even if you're in a 40 or 50-year-old body, or even a 30-year-old body, you're operating from an operating system of a 17-year-old because you're choosing not to navigate. You're like, I don't need to learn. I don't need to. And it's a conversation that a lot of people do resist. But knowing that the more we let go of even those kind of ideas, that we're always here to learn. There's always something to learn. There's always something that's available to support us. What happens is the lessons that show up in our life are not going to be as feared, because we can quiet some of that noise and not be attached to the asset component, which is all the things we've collected and think we are completely committed to. And like tshuva, we're returning to ourselves. We're returning to our personal experience. We're returning to the authenticity, our internal authenticity. And the beauty there is that we're able to strip away anything that might be standing in our way. And the more we know, right? So we can take this time for tshuva to ask yourselves the questions you want to ask yourself. Like, what is it that I would like to achieve in this next year? What's important to me? When we take the time to really know these things, to really ask ourselves these questions, what is supportive in my life? What am I really afraid of? And then when we have that list, you can take that list and say to yourself, like, for example, the question, what am I afraid of? Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Make that list and then ask yourself, how can I educate myself on those topics?